It has now been 4 years that the Australian citizen Robert Pether languishes in an Iraqi jail, arbitrarily detained, according to the Human Rights Council's Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, since April 7th, 2021. On that day, Pether, the lead engineer for the construction of the Central Bank of Iraq, was taken hostage, along with an Egyptian colleague, in relation to a contractual dispute between the bank and their employer, Cardno Middle East. The dispute is over an unpaid bill by the central bank to Cardno, the building contractor for the project. The two senior employees were invited to attend a reconciliation meeting in Iraq, after which they were unexpectedly arrested by a dozen police.
The men were then charged with fraud and fined $13 million, roughly the same amount that the central bank was in arrears.
There have since been 3 rulings against the central bank at the International Chamber of Commerce, Court of Arbitration, and in the Netherlands. Yet Pether and his colleague Khaled continue to be held in harsh conditions as leverage in a resolution with their employer, and they are to be held indefinitely, according to an order sent by the bank to a local judge. Pether was due for release on January 8, but that did not happen.
Australia's Foreign Minister Penny Wong, who had said last November that she would be concerned if Pether was not released as expected, issued a further statement on April 7th, the 4th anniversary of his detention. She said, quote, "Australian citizen Robert Pether has now been in prison in Iraq for 4 years. He has served the custodial sentence imposed on him by the Iraqi courts. It's time for him to be returned to his family. The Australian government will continue to advocate for Mr. Pether's release."
The Foreign Minister's post on X was picked up 3 days later, on April 10th, by the US Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs, stating, "We stand with our Australian partners in calling for the release of Robert Pether following the end of his custodial sentence. We hope to see him reunited with his family as soon as possible." We're here with Robert's wife, Desiree, who has been struggling for years to free him, and Senator David Shoebridge, who can weigh in on these latest developments and Australia's response in light of last year's findings of a parliamentary inquiry into the wrongful detention of Australian citizens overseas. Desiree, welcome to CN Live. What does Iraq want to free the men? And how are they faring? Is CME, their employer, likely to drop its case against the central bank in order to free them? And how much pressure is the Australian government applying to retrieve its citizen?
Well, Iraq still wants that case dropped. And this is the Central Bank of Iraq, which is, of course, a government entity. The 3 international rulings that you mentioned, the one in the Netherlands last year endorses the New York Convention on Arbitration, which Iraq signed in May 2021. So in actual fact, Iraq has an obligation to accept international court rulings. And then in January, on the 6th of January, 2 days before Robert was due to be released, the Central Bank of Iraq lost their appeal in the ICC as well. So there's 3 international court rulings, and they're just ignoring that. And I have asked the ambassador of the Iraq embassy here in Dublin, when I went to visit him last, does Iraq honour their agreements? And he said, absolutely, yes, they do. And Iraq is signing agreements in London and agreements in the US at the moment. And those agreements apparently mean something. So they should be honouring what has happened in the ICC and letting 2 innocent employees go. Robert's employer has completely abandoned him and hasn't paid salary for nearly a year, hasn't paid any legal fees since he was first arrested, and they had the first court case in August 21. So we're absolutely at the point of selling everything to survive and to keep the boys at university and to keep Robert, feed Robert so he doesn't have to have prison food and to pay for his legal expenses. They're threatening him with a new fabricated criminal case, and there is no indication that it will be anything but another foregone conclusion.
Oh, goodness. I'll just bring in Senator Shoebridge now. Senator Shoebridge, thank you so much for coming back to talk about Robert's case. We spoke last time about the parliamentary report on wrongful detention of Australian citizens overseas and Senator Steele-John's findings that there is still no working definition for arbitrary detention and or wrongful detention, which he says has resulted in failures of the government to get Australians home in a timely and minimally traumatic manner. Well, traumatic is not the word. Can we get your reaction to the Foreign Minister's latest push to free Pether and on these latest developments in the international and local Iraqi courts?
Well, first of all, Kathy, thanks for continuing to advocate for Robert and credit to Desiree. It must be, so traumatizing to try and keep a family together and then have to advocate for 4 years to have your husband released from what are obviously trumped up charges. And, there's been report after report identifying the arbitrary nature of Robert's detention, including credible reports from the UN committee that oversights arbitrary detention. And what did we see again from the Australian Foreign Minister? I think you've been polite when you describe it as a push from the Australian Foreign Minister. The Foreign Minister did a tweet, and in that tweet called for Robert Pether to be released. And that would be similar to the hundreds of individual ineffectual representations that have already been made by the Australian Embassy in Iraq. And I could give you a list of Penny Wong's tweets that have also been equally ineffectual in getting Robert released. Australia still has almost 30-odd-year-old sanctions against Iraq arising from Saddam Hussein's time in government, targeting anybody who is associated with Saddam Hussein's regime. They seem to have no current purpose. But I tell you what might work would be Australia working with like-minded countries around the world to target key figures in the Iraqi regime, such as the Justice Minister, those responsible for pushing these trumped-up charges against an Australian and targeting them and saying you can't travel to Australia, you can't bring your wealth to Australia, your family can't travel to Australia, can't be educated in Australia, and work with like-minded partners around the world to put that kind of pressure on Iraq. Because I've got to tell you now, there's probably a wall up in the Iraqi Justice Minister's office papered with printouts of Penny Wong's tweets, which they just laugh at. I mean, we have a significant two-way trade with Iraq as well. I think that should clearly be on the line. And I think what is so frustrating is, for any Australian to put themselves in the position of Robert and Desiree and the kids and to think that our government does so little to release an Australian citizen who is literally being held in arbitrary detention by a country we have friendly relationships with, we have a large trade relationship with, and our government does so little to free an Australian who's been arbitrarily detained. And when you talk to Desiree and you see the images of Robert, you can just see what a brutal conditions he's been held in, literally starved if he's not provided with food from the family, inhumane conditions now for 4 years. When will the government act?
Yeah, good question, David. Elizabeth, did you have any further questions for Senator Shoebridge? He has to go soon.
Yeah, just one. Why is it that you think the Australian government hasn't been more forceful? What's driving that lack of response?
Well, there's a disease of thinking in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, led from the top by, Labor Minister Penny Wong, which is they prize ongoing dialogue with countries around the world over and above taking effective action. And, I could point to case after case after case after case where often communities in Australia, individuals in Australia have called for Magnitsky-targeted sanctions against individuals who are responsible for appalling human rights abuses, disappearances, arbitrary violence against their political opponents. Robert's case, the arrest of an Australian citizen and continued detention on trumped-up charges, and zero action from the Albanese Labor government. I'll give you one example. We've seen a citizen-led, student-led revolution in Bangladesh in the last 12 months. One of the reasons the people of Bangladesh were so violently opposed, brutally opposed to the former dictatorship was because they had an organisation called the Rapid Action Battalion, which was a paramilitary, quasi-military amalgam of their security forces, their police forces, and their military. And it was notorious for hundreds and hundreds of executions and disappearances of political opponents. Now, the United States moved to sanction the leadership of the Rapid Action Battalion, prevent them coming to the United States, target their wealth, identify them as a risk, and join in solidarity with the people of Bangladesh. We tried for 2.5 years to get the Australian government to move, and they wouldn't even respond to a letter. They wouldn't even respond in the face of large-scale arbitrary detentions and murders and disappearances of political opponents in Bangladesh. And I don't know why. I can't work out the failure to act, but I could give you 50 other cases like that around the world where our government just refuses to act. And it's because, my only conclusion is they like to have chats with people. They think it's important to go and have a chat with the ambassador in Iraq, to be able to go and have a chat with the justice minister and chat with the government. Well, fine, chat by all means. But when they're abusing Australian citizens, when they're arbitrarily executing their own people, take a bloody stand.
Thank you so much for your time, which we know is very limited this morning.
Well, yeah, we are in the middle of an election campaign,
yes.
And so I am sorry, I'm a bit time limited. But Desiree, to you and the kids, you do have millions of people supporting you across the country. We know it's unfair, and I think it's the fact that you even don't have their government providing basic foodstuffs to Robert, that's also fallen on the family, just is an indication of how alone you are as against the government. But can I tell you, you're not alone out there in the community, and we're all thinking of you.
Thank you so much. I wish there was so many more like you, David. Thank you so much for your support.
Right. Take care, Rob.
Bye. Yes, Desiree, in Ireland, you're getting a lot more support, and the media as well, of course. And I refer to that recent interview that your son did with an Irish radio station. So tell us a little bit about what the Irish think about this, the Irish officials.
They pretty much agree exactly with what David just said, and they have been very, very supportive. It's been chalk and cheese, and they, right from the word go, have been very supportive and counselling me in decisions regarding talking to the media, things like that. They've got a lot more experience. The person that I speak to has a lot of experience and has worked as an ambassador as well. So they're a lot more interactive, and I talk to them pretty much every week. And I've been to see the foreign minister, and I'm due to see the new foreign minister soon as well. And when I went to their parliament, I had all these politicians coming up to me and just saying, I'm so sorry that this is happening, and please send our best regards to Robert. It's just such a different experience all round. And the media the Australian media for a lot of it have been supportive and really genuinely want to help and do the best they can. But, there's just so much going on at the moment with the elections and everything like that. We've lived through tennis player going missing, tennis players not allowed to play in Australia, so many different scandals and things that have gone on, and it's just crazy, and I'm just sort of shouting into the abyss, trying to get attention. And the Irish media is very supportive, and Flynn did that interview 2 weeks ago, and which was brilliant. He's 21 now, and he was 17 when Robert was taken, and right in the middle of the equivalent of his HSC exams. So it's very hard on the boys, and they pretty much keep out of the media side of things.
Yeah, I mentioned Irish politicians because you do reside in Ireland. Is Robert a dual national?
No, they're helping Robert because he's a human being. Yeah. And myself and the kids are dual nationals. And of course, we were living here at the time that he was taken. So that's why they're helping Robert, because he's a human being. Whereas in Australia, there are politicians that have just said, well, he's not in my electorate. But he's an Australian and he's a human being. And is that not enough? It's just crazy. And it occurred to me yesterday that not one female politician has helped, apart from a couple who have written a letter to Foreign Minister Wong and then ticked a box, and that was the end of it, and then never responded to me again. So that's what's so soul destroying, is chasing all the time, begging for support from our own country.
In your son's interview, he mentioned that you guys are in dire straits. You said that you had paid $140,000 in lawyers' fees, and now you're selling your car, and you are also thinking of selling your house as well because you can't even afford to heat it through a very cold Irish winter. Can you tell us if you have a fundraiser or something?
We did do a GoFundMe, but, I hate asking friends for money because, we're all in the same situation. And it's really, really hard to, Robert and I are always the ones helping other people. It's very hard for us to ask for help. And yeah, we are selling our house as well. And we bought this place when Robert was taken. I was doing a doctorate in herbal medicine, and it was supposed to be a healing place for women and empowering women workshops. And we just have to shelf that now. That it's just not going to happen. That life is gone, and we have to, we have to fight. We've got another fabricated case coming up, which could, is another foregone conclusion. So that's another 15 years added onto his sentence.
Can you tell us something about Robert's health and how likely he is to be able to survive another 15 years?
He won't survive another 15 years. I can tell you that. Emotionally or physically, he is a melanoma survivor, and the melanoma that he had was very, very aggressive. And he has a skin condition, so he is covered in moles. And when he was subjected to medical treatment for his moles 2 years ago, there was 10 doctors in an Iraq hospital standing there gawking at him while he stood there naked, because he doesn't have any rights. He's not a patient, he's a prisoner. And he has a few moles that have changed, but they don't have the adequate care, a specialist dermatologist to look after him in that country. We have established that multiple times. So he's not getting the yearly checks that he should be getting and the specialist care. And so we don't even know if he's got another melanoma. He's got a whole explosion of new moles since he was arrested from stress and from his living conditions. And he's in pain all the time. They found some issues with his prostate when he was scanned last year, and he has lots of pain in his back. He's sick all the time. He's been sick for the last 2 weeks and just really sick, like nauseous. And he's lost more than half his body weight. He's only 85 kilos now, and he's over 6 foot. He's just withering away, and he won't survive.
Yeah, that's terrible.
This is a death sentence.
It's absolutely horrendous, Desiree, and I hope that something can be done. I mean, really, all of the things that David Shoebridge suggested. I'm just going to hand you over to Elizabeth again, because I think that she has some more questions for you.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, my biggest one is this. In your last appearance with us on CN Live, you mentioned that Robert's being held hostage, specifically using the word hostage, because he's being held for benefit. So can you explain that a little bit further as far as, who exactly is benefiting from this and what are they looking for? I mean, I know that obviously there's a demand for money, but what do they really, really politically, strategically want?
Okay, so in the UN report from March 2022, it states that he's being held for leverage. A few people have said according to his family, but it's actually according to the UN report. It's the Central Bank of Iraq, and they want Robert's employer to drop the ICC case. And Robert's employer has abandoned Robert and has no care whatsoever about Robert's well-being. Robert has written 15 letters to his employer, asking his employer to agree to the demands of Central Bank of Iraq in return for his freedom and for his life. And he hasn't even had a reply from his employer. The 12.2 million that his employer has been awarded in the ICC means more to them than Robert's life. So this whole thing, because the Central Bank of Iraq is a government entity, and the governor of the Central Bank of Iraq is a political position appointed by the Prime Minister. So this is sanctioned torture, extortion, sorry, this case. What happened was that there was internal squabbling between Central Bank of Iraq employees, senior officials. So the governor, the then governor of the time, and also the director of administration. Now, the director of administration set up this project. So then when there was a dispute between Robert's employer and the Central Bank of Iraq over non-payment of invoices for 6 months, the then governor took that as an opportunity to discredit his colleague who set up the project. So Robert has always been a pawn, and that's what it was always about. So keeping them indefinitely covers the people that did this in the first place for their own gain. So that's the crux of it. He's a pawn.
And yet nobody's really gaining from this. I mean, CME aren't getting their money, and
No, they think they're going to.
The bank isn't getting off the hook
No,
in the international courts. And
no.
of course, the two men are, suffering torturous conditions. Everybody loses.
Well, I say this to the Iraq embassy when I go there, and I've also Zoomed with the Iraq embassy in Canberra, and I've been to the Iraq embassy in London as well. And I've said that, Robert is silenced while he's in prison, and he can't, expose what happened. But if he dies in there, then I will come and I will hold everyone accountable, either the people that did this or the ones that have sat there and been complacent and allowed this to happen in all countries, not just Iraq, who have let this happen and done nothing. There will be accountability. I keep begging the Australian government as well. Robert worked so hard, worked part-time and did his degree over 8 years. And he's the best of the best. He can put his hand up and take any project. He wanted to make a difference. And he's the same as any surgeon that goes over to a war-torn country. He went over there to rebuild the country and to help. He was doing the bank, and then he was also doing 3 hospitals, and he was doing mega greenhouses for food security. And he updated one of the hospitals for free as a sign of goodwill so that it was up to international standards. And he has even said up until recently that if he was released, he would still oversee those hospitals from offshore because he made a commitment to help Iraq rebuild. And it's not all of the Iraqi people that have done this to Robert, it's only a few. He had the same level of security as any embassy. He wasn't backpacking through a war-torn country. And he had the assurance of the Central Bank of Iraq, the client, that he would be safe. And they had them in a secure compound next to the construction site with security. They had bulletproof cars to and from the airport with secure drivers. So just as much security. So he thought he was safe, and he went in there, up with educated decision, with years of experience in the Middle East, and with the assurance of a government entity, the Central Bank of Iraq. And they did this, used him as a pawn for their own internal squabbling and their own agenda.
Yeah. Thank you, Desiree, for coming back on CN Live to talk about Robert's situation. I really hope that it doesn't come to you having to go there, because I would fear for your safety too.
I'm not going there. I'm definitely not going there. No, I would not be safe, and Robert doesn't want me there. I'm the only parent our children have, and I'm not ever going to Iraq. And also, I could never walk away and say goodbye to him. If I went and saw him, I could never then turn around and walk away. So,
Yeah, I see. And let's hope that you find the help that you need in order to keep your home, at least. Yeah. We'll speak soon again.
Thank you very much for your support.
Thank you, Desiree.